Hey, Wole, it's good to see you again. It's been a while. I hope you and the family are well.
Yeah, we're doing well. Appreciate that. How's everything on your side?
We've been good, but all this news with the layoffs, the tech
Yeah,
layoffs, and
yeah.
all across the industry has just been crazy, hasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of, I was thinking about that. Uh, there's a little bit of irony there because our channel is all about working in tech. We're focused on working in tech sales, but there's been a lot of bad news in the tech space. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it's important for us to talk about this and to put it in perspective.
Yeah. Let's dig into it. This is going to be our second session, but let's dig into it. You guys don't want to miss this one. So yeah, the news has just been unbelievable. I mean, people in multiple large companies that historically have done well have been laid off. What's been your reaction as you just talked to friends and people that you know, colleagues about the whole thing? And we're not going to get specific to Microsoft or Google, but just talking in general about the layoff because there's so many companies that have been affected by this in the last 3 to 4 months.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, both of us work for companies that have experienced this, and we have friends throughout the industry. So yeah, I mean, it definitely hits home. Um,
Yeah.
I think for me, there's a lot of perspectives, and I mean, I'm sure we're going to get into this as we talk, but I guess it all depends on what your expectations are in working for large corporations. And so I think what I've seen is that there's different sorts of expectations that people have had about what
Yeah.
job security would be like, and I've seen different things. So I mean, let's get into it. I mean, just off the top, like what are some of the things that you've heard on your side of the house, both from the perspective of where you work, but more broadly throughout folks who work in this space and in the technology industry.
Yeah. So just across multiple companies, I'm just hearing kind of the same thing that people are being laid off in all different types of groups. Some of them customer facing, some of them behind the scenes, and managing programs. It's been across the board. I think that's what's caused so much turmoil and distress because historically, last hired, first fired, right? You depending on how old you are, you're familiar with that kind of routine. And tech was usually layoffs around performance. So in sales, if your sales numbers are low, right, you can almost expect that you're going to get either worked out of the company or put on a plan as they call it and no longer with the company. And if you have any other metric, right, or you're working in another part of tech industry and you're not meeting a certain metric or a certain goal, and you can kind of see that laying out. But this just had a different feel to it. We have people in multiple different companies saying, hey, they did really well last year, or their performance was there was no sign of their performance dropping, and yet they were laid off. So I think, to your point, the expectations of job security may have been higher than it actually was in reality. And I think it's easy to fall into that feeling of, hey, I'm good. The company's making a lot of money. The company's innovating. Um, the reputation of the company is very strong. I shouldn't have any problems. And it just was a wake up call, I think, for everybody that says, even if the bottom line is pretty good, the company can still make a call and say, we want to reduce that cost or we want to make the margins even higher. And that's where you see all these companies, to my knowledge, I need to dig into a little bit. All of them were profitable, right? There
Yeah.
wasn't any company that lost money, from an annual perspective. So that really tells you you cannot get too comfortable. And that's really the message I want to convey in this session. You can't get too comfortable and set the expectations too high of security because anything can happen to anybody.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that. We'll in this video we'll talk about things that you can do to protect or buffer yourself from these types of unfortunate realities. But going back to some of what you talked about, the first thing I want to say is to anyone who's been negatively impacted. by layoffs in the tech segment,
Yeah.
uh, please do not take it personally. To your point, in many cases, it was not necessarily the decisions weren't driven by negative performance. It shouldn't be a reflection. It is not a reflection on
Right.
anyone's capabilities or their performance. In many cases, it was just it was a numbers game, and so
Yeah.
either different parts of the business decision was made to not invest as much in those parts of the business, or just cost had to be cut. And so I think that puts it into we should bring it into the conversation around the larger economy, because as we know, for about a year now, we've been facing a very uncertain economy, and so what we're seeing is that these cuts that were made are really a reflection on the weak economy that we're existing in, and it's a cascade effect. And so,
Yeah.
if companies are not spending money, if they are decelerating their spend across all the places they spend money, there will be a cascade effect to the tech companies who we work for. They won't spend
Yeah.
as much money with the tech companies, and so it just that's kind of how it works. And so it's a domino effect. So I think it's really more of a function of what's happening in the broader economy. Obviously, there's a war going on right now. Oil prices have been high. There's a slowdown. Interest rates are high. So there's a lot of factors that have come into play. And so I think what is new is that people had always assumed that companies in the technology sector were immune either to these macroeconomic
Yeah.
conditions or
Right.
or to um, layoffs as a fix or as a result of these conditions. So this should be a reminder that these are all publicly traded companies.
That's
They
right.
have to report to their shareholders, and so
Yeah.
a lot of these decisions have to be considered in that light.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and I'm glad you touched on that. This is not a reflection on anyone that was directly affected. That it was something that they did or didn't do. We'll talk about just some ways to minimize the potential to be laid off or cut because it can happen to anybody regardless of what you're doing. But there are some things that I try to do to minimize that, and I know some of my mentors have taught me to minimize the effect. But you could have a great successful year, and if the company feels like it's better without you, or they can reduce their costs without you, they'll do that. And that's just a corporate playbook, right? That has nothing to do with any particular company being publicly traded. There's certain things they'll automatically do if there's any nervousness or any hesitancy about the amount of revenues coming in, future projecting. And a lot of times the company will say, "Hey, we're fine now, but the weak economy is ahead of us, so we got to insulate ourselves from any risk." And unfortunately, a lot of times that's human risk that they take. So one of the things that getting into, how do you help insulate yourself or reduce? We'll call it reduce the chance of being laid off. And for me, it's always been stay as close to the revenue as possible. So having a role in the tech industry or any company, the closer you are to impacting revenue, the more likely you'll be the last one out the door because you are the one that's helping directly impact bringing revenue. And there's roles that assist in bringing revenue. Then there's roles that have direct responsibility. So for me, that's one thing I've always looked at when if I take a role in a tech company or anywhere, how much am I impacting revenue directly? Am I working in a cost center where my particular department is costing the company? It may be a necessary function, but it's not driving any revenue. Or am I working with a unit or division which is just revenue producing? And that's important to me. I like being in that spot. Usually, there's more pressure. There's more stress in that. But when it comes to layoffs or cuts, so they got to trim things or reorganize. A lot of times they don't hit the revenue generating area for the most part at any company.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I hear you saying is to ensure that you are in as consequential a role to the company as possible. And
Yeah,
so For me, I remember when I first joined Microsoft many, many years ago. A couple of friends of mine, it was a huge company way back then. So a couple of friends of mine sort of mapped it out for me, all the different all the different parts of the company, and they couldn't do it in totality, but they maybe they broke it into four big buckets. Um,
Yeah,
but the most important ones that they one of the most important things that they pointed out to me was that they talked about our engineering teams who create the products. And then the other key area among the areas they pointed out to me were the sales teams who sell the
yeah,
product. And so if you think about a company like, I'm talking about Microsoft, the specific company I work for, those are very integral. I mean, you need to make the products, and then somebody has to sell the products. And so, to your point, um, it, in that kind of a model, if you are on the engineering side, the closer you are to being in a role that is consequential towards the creation of products, because you can have a lot of roles in the engineering organization that might be
yeah,
supporting the creation of products, but the closer you get to the actual creation of products in that side of the house, that's you want to think about that. On the
yeah,
sales side, going to the point you made, the closer you can get to being in a role that is directly facing the customer, or more specifically owning the relationship with the customer, the better you are, the harder you are to replace, and the more
yeah,
consequential you are. So I say that all that to say that when you're going into your career, when you're thinking about your career, you want to be very strategic and very thoughtful. Um,
yeah,
in different points in your career, you may not necessarily land in a role that that is the exact role that you want, but you should have in mind these sort of principles. Like if you're on the sales
yeah,
side, how do I get as close to the customer as possible? Because that's the most, in general, that's the most consequential role. So you have an account executive role, and that typically
right,
is a person who has direct ownership and responsibility for the customer. And then you have some other roles that support the account executive. Um, those
yeah,
tend to be less consequential. I'm not making an absolute statement, I'm making a general statement. So you want to think like that. And of course, you also have roles that sort of exist in um, let's say that you support a technology, right? So
yeah,
if you
yeah,
work for a technology company and they sell 10 different technologies to customers, and you are responsible for technology A out of
mm,
A through Z, um, great. Be the expert in that technology, be consequential in that technology, be the go-to
yeah,
person in that technology, versus someone who might sort of be a generalist and in between. You
right,
want to be the person who owns something. So
right,
that's kind of the way to think about it strategically in your
yeah,
career.
yeah. I agree with you, and just for transparency, we both know of people that were customer facing roles and engineers who were caught up in the layoffs across different companies. So it's like you said, it's not a guarantee, but you think about the opportunity or the chance are much smaller when you're in those roles. I think about it as you either trying to make the donuts or sell the donuts,
Right,
right? And what kind of role you have. But sometimes, when these companies are doing 6%, 7%, 8% layoffs, you're still going to possibly potentially get caught up in that. However, if you are caught up in a layoff, you have build skill sets that transfers to the next company, your next
yeah,
chapter, your next journey.
absolutely.
And it's about that too, is for whatever reason, maybe not have been anything that person did,
Right.
but the skill set they built makes that easily transferable to another company, and you can pick up and continue to drive your career. So that person owning the revenue in front of the customer, that's a highly sought after skill and knowledge. The person that's engineer who's developing the product, building the product, those are skills that you can take and move around and go to different companies. And that's what's important, is making sure you're building something that if something happens to your role or the team or the company, you are still building for yourself and able to move on to the next job.
Staying relevant. And actually, let me make a point
Yeah,
that you kind of brought up in my mind. So you talked about you gave the example of making donuts or selling donuts. So let's say you're on the making donuts side, and um, does that make you immune because you make donuts? No, you could still be, as we've
yeah,
seen across the tech sector. There have been people who make the donuts, the engineers. There have been people who've been impacted by a layoff. So here's what I
yeah,
would say. Again, I think you need to be as strategic as possible in your career. So what do I mean by that? Well, you need to pay attention to what the leaders of your company are saying about the product portfolio. Let's say
yeah,
you need to pay attention to what your company is making and what your company is successfully selling, because
yeah,
let's say you are a donut company, and you sell lots of donuts, but maybe 80% of what you sell are glazed donuts. You make jelly
yeah,
donuts as well, but you don't sell as much, and maybe you're losing money on those. Well, if you're
right.
in the jelly donut division,
Yeah,
um,
right. If you're a
you
jelly
might be
donut specialist.
you might be more at
Right,
risk. So
that's
that is
right.
to say, pay attention to the big picture. Make sure
Yeah,
you are aligned with the part of the company that is most consequential to the bottom line.
yeah. Where
Because
the key bets are. Yeah,
absolutely,
yeah,
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 either um, um, what the company is having the most success with today,
yeah,
or what the company is truly investing on in the future. So maybe the company hasn't sold a lot of these future donuts. Maybe these are banana coconut donuts that
yeah,
the company is developing, because you're paying attention to what the executives are saying. You know, they really believe in these. They haven't sold it yet, but they really
yeah,
believe in it. Make sure you're aligned there. So it's really about, again, I'm probably overusing this, being strategic. Make sure you are strategically placed. Pay attention. Don't just work in these companies. Don't just apply anywhere. Pay attention to what you're doing. Pay attention to what the executives are saying. Pay attention to how the market's responding. Really invest
yeah.
into understanding what the company's doing.
And on that note, that really ties into what I was going to say is get to know the company, get to know the different divisions, the different products. If like you said, if you are making the donuts, what other kind of donuts are being made? What other kind of donuts are really hot right now? What products is the company pushing? But learn the layout and the makeup of those divisions, and don't be afraid to expand, right? And work on different teams. Again, building your portfolio of skills until you find the niche that says the company is making a big bet in this area and I enjoy it and I'm improving my skills. That's the perfect set circumstances where you are working in a division or in a team that the company feels is critical for their success and is building on your skill set that's transferable somewhere else and you're enjoying what you're doing. But I'm a big proponent of understand whatever company I work for, I always try to understand a different group, different divisions, what kind of jobs they have, what's going over here, so that I can position myself to move if I need to. And if I'm in a division where I feel like, hey, things are kind of stale or stagnant, my self-education of these different divisions allows me to move or apply to different divisions because I've built a network, an internal company network with these different people. I've reached out to them. Sometimes it's easy to get so focused on your job or role in your division, especially if you like what you do, it's at a company you like, you're not building that internal network, the intercompany network that allows you to know what's happening in these different groups and the change and the move. That's really critical in a career is understanding the landscape, and this is really it's applicable if you're in a really big company. If you're in a small company, a startup, right? There really may not be anywhere for you to go, but why not understand all you can about that company
Yeah,
and also how similar companies are structured? So again, you don't have to have your bag packed like you're getting ready, something's getting ready to happen all the time, but you certainly want to be prepared and build yourself to understand what's going on around you, so you aren't just caught off guard. You shouldn't have to wait for your manager to come and say, you know what, we're not going to make those donuts anymore.
Right.
We're not going to make this product. You should see as things develop that this is not the right group to be in, and take a proactive move and move somewhere else. Sometimes you have no way of knowing, right? Sometimes it is blindside. A lot of these layoffs that just happened were complete blindsides for a lot of people. But there were others where it probably was not blindsided, but they were waiting, right?
Yeah.
Waiting for something to happen. And then it did happen. But the best way to help again insulate yourself is know the different groups in the company you work in. Know the how key or critical is your product to the company's success. Because at the
Yeah.
end of the day, I don't care if it's donuts to some type of cutting edge technology. If the company can cut that technology and be more profitable or even do better, they'll do it. And
Yeah.
that's across manufacturing, retail, on and on and on.
Yeah.
But that's something we always want to you always want to think about.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. You touched on a lot of important themes there. I mean, I can reflect back to my own career. So, I think, as I mentioned before in an earlier video, I work in the cloud business at
Yeah,
Microsoft in one of our sales organizations. But prior to me moving into this role, I was working in a completely different business, which again, reading the tea leaves, listening to our executives, um, following the industry, I saw it becoming a less important part of our of the company. So
yeah,
I made a deliberate career shift into a new part of the business, a new role that I didn't necessarily have a great understanding of. But this goes back to the other thing you were talking about around skilling. That's
yeah,
another thing that's super important. You in the tech sector, you have to be a lifelong learner, or at least a career long learner.
yeah,
The space is so dynamic. It's changing so fast. What you knew
mhm,
1 year ago is no longer relevant. So you have to be interested and willing to continue to learn and passionate
yeah,
about it, right? So the people who do the
yeah,
best in tech are people who are very interested in keeping their skills up to date. So you have to do that.
yeah,
So that's super important. And obviously, that makes you more attractive if something were to happen,
yeah,
because people understand this person possesses up to date skills and they have a history of doing that. And then the
yeah.
last thing is around network. So 100% agree with you on network. Um,
That's critical. Yeah,
every single role I've been in, and I've been in 10 roles outside of the very first one was a result of
yeah,
networking.
yeah,
So networking is super important, not just within the company, but then outside of the company. So we have things like LinkedIn that
yeah,
you can use as a tool. And so I heard something from a friend of mine, advice that he gave, which I'll repeat, which is that he doesn't wait until something happens to reach out to his network, right? He keeps that
yeah.
network, his external network I'm talking about, but
Active.
I'm sure his internal network as well keeps it
Yeah,
active. So is
right.
reaching out to people in other companies at any given point, even if he's not looking for anything,
That's
so
great.
that
Yeah,
if a situation arises where he is, he's not just saying they're not saying, "Hey, we haven't heard from you in years." So
right.
keeping that network active, and there's other things you can do. And we'll have an episode on this, I'm sure, around
Absolutely. Yeah,
how do you actually use LinkedIn to as a branding tool for yourself. So that's part of
yeah,
what you can do as well as far as activating that network. So the network is super important. Scaling is super important, and so those are some. I mean, I think for me, those are the key things to think about to prepare yourself for some unfortunate circumstances like this.
yeah. And I want to hear from our viewers if you can comment below on what do you think the most important thing is? It skill set? Is it networking? As well as how do you network? What's the best thing? Some people don't like LinkedIn. Some people love LinkedIn. I see people all the time. They just have their job title and the date they started at the current job, right? There's no description. They aren't selling themselves on
Hmm.
LinkedIn. And that's
Right.
the main source that recruiters are using today to find people. That's how you build your network. So to your friend's point that he says he's always reaching and building network, that allows him to learn too, right? From really smart people, people in other roles that he may not even be aware of. He learns about those roles. It may be alter a person's career path based on
Yeah.
talking to these other individuals. So always, being we're not all salesmen, but be in the mindset of you're selling yourself, and as you said, build your brand. Now, if LinkedIn is not your thing, fine, but are you building your brand on social media, right? Social media can be a powerful tool more than just scrolling, looking at, random cat videos, right? Use that as build your brand so that you're building up a great network and a change. And I think we do. I like to do a session with you. Maybe that'd be a good session we do next around how to utilize LinkedIn to build a brand and how to network. Because sometimes people just don't know how to do that, right?
Yeah.
What should I post? When should I post? But there's a ton of tools and things that you can do to really capitalize on that.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
we're coming up
Absolutely.
on 30 minutes. And we're trying to keep these about 30-minute sessions. As a parting thing, what's kind of your final that you like to say to some of the folks who are affected by the layoffs and some that may be nervous, right, about the next wave, if there is a next wave, or what if it was me type of
Yeah.
message.
Well, I mean, again, as far as message to anyone who's been impacted, again, don't take this personally. It has, in most
Yeah,
cases, it has very little to do with you. There were other factors at hand. And then, as far as folks who are nervous, listen to some of the points that we made. Listen to the points that we made in this video, which is really focused on insulating and ensuring that if something were to happen because of circumstances outside of your control, outside of anyone's control, economy, war, etc., what you can how you can be very strategic and thoughtful about your career so that you put yourself in as minimal a position to be impacted by something like this. So hey,
yeah,
this is a very somber topic. I
yeah,
know, but I think it's worth us spending this time on this topic because
yeah,
it's timely, it's real, it's happened, um, and we can't do this channel and about working in technology and the great things about working in technology and ignore some of these things that have happened.
yeah. I agree. And for those who were directly affected, my message is you're the same person that got hired by that great tech company. You've only enhanced your skill set since you started with whatever company that you were laid off from. So take what you learn, take that added experience, and then move to the next chapter and build out a plan. But as your point is, it may not have been anything you did or didn't do, but you have gained experience. You gained increased knowledge, and take that really to parlay into the next chapter. And please watch out for the channel, subscribe because we're going to start doing a lot of things to help people and some advice, talk about some successes. And tech industry is still hiring, right? They there's with the layoffs, we still have hirings, and there's people that would love to have some of those that were laid off because they know where they came from and their skills and their knowledge. So it may not be your ideal situation,
Yep.
but they're still hiring, and you move on to the next chapter. But I would love to hear from you guys in the comments about best ways to network, some ways you network, how to use LinkedIn, and then we'll pick that up as a next topic based on the comments that we do get. So subscribe and like this video if you were able to. If you watch it this far, hit that like and subscribe so you can catch the next one.